allow me to live and breathe like a man.
You've heard his words on classic albums like Pacific Ocean Blue and Friends. His 1969 collaboration with Brian Wilson, A World of Peace Must Come, gained almost legendary status as one of pop's most storied lost albums, before being resurrected to great acclaim by Light in the Attic in 2008. Now you're cordially invited to take a trip into the mind of poet and songwriter Stephen J. Kalinich. Heyday Again Records presents I Love My Life, a postcard from one of the last standing poets of peace and excitation. Order your copy today. I Love My Life by Stephen J. Kalinich and Friends. You'll see why heavy hitters like Brian Wilson, Dennis Wilson, Paul McCartney, Steve Cropper, P.F. Sloan, and Diana Ross have all worked with him. I Love My Life by Stephen J. Kalinich. Order today at realgonemusic.com. Again, that's realgonemusic.com.
And remember, at the time, LSD was new. They didn't know about dosing. They really didn't know about the effects, long-term, even short-term, etc. Do you feel that this was the turning point for Brian, and that the LSD experience he had when he first started, when it was a brand new substance out there, damaged his brain and affected him for the rest of his life?
I think it had a part in that. You know, it's not for everybody, because if you have any latent psychosis in your family, you might not be the kind of person who should be dabbling with it. And for Brian, there was that added component of being a very sensitive personality type who felt things very deeply and who was in the public eye as well. Welcome to another episode of Discograffiti's wildly in-depth Beach Boys series and Your Dreams Come True, where Brian Wilson freaks like you and me get our chance to delve deep into the barely believable history and prodigious discography of my favorite band of all time, and also coincidentally the best, along with a slew of over 50 top-shelf guests, ranging from musicians inspired by their work, family members, documentary directors, songwriting collaborators, Beach Boys authors, producers, touring band members, and for good measure, some of the Beach Boys themselves. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and special thanks goes out to co-producers Chuck Granata, Dennis Dyken, and Mark Freed, without whom this series would not have happened. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, along with our special guest, author and pet sounds expert Chuck Granata. This is episode 5, an examination of everything you'll ever need to know about I Know There's an Answer, originally written as Hang On to Your Ego, and Here Today. Here are just a few of the many things that Chuck discusses with Discograffiti in this podcast. The extremely illuminating original title of Hang On to Your Ego, some background info on little-known Ego co-writer Terry Sachen, the impact of LSD on Brian's consciousness during that time, the difficulty that Tony Asher had in writing lyrics to Here Today, the fraught relationship that Brian Wilson had with Here Today, the Four Seasons song that may have been a Here Today influence, and how Chuck and I connect with I Know There's an Answer, Hang On to Your Ego, and Here Today in a laid-bare, explicitly personal way. If you're a Beach Boys superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features a plethora of additional essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Or better yet, just subscribe for access to the complete versions of all our shows. I recommend the Lieutenant tier at the very least, so you can access those director's cuts, because they include every last moment that was intended for these episodes, but it's actually the major tier that you want if you want it all. Here's what you're missing this week if you're not a Patreon member. If you're a member at the private tier, you're missing out on our stunning Hang On to Your Ego Beach Boys session collage, plus the director's cut of my interview with ex-Pixies bassist Pazlin Chanton about her incredible new solo record. If you're a member at the lieutenant tier, you're missing out on the Hang On to Your Ego Beach Boys session collage. And if you're a member at the major tier, well, you're not missing a thing. But even if you're on the fence, just head over there, because it's finally free to become a basic member. And you don't want to miss being notified about every single one of these episodes. Because coming up, we got an interview with Lenny Waronker, Al Jardine, Bruce Johnston, Tony Asher, Jimmy Webb, Kim Fowley, Phil Ramone, Paul Tanner, Larry Knechtel, Don Randy, Dominic Priori, Bob Irwin, Mark Lynette, Billy Strange, Hal Blaine, Larry Levine, Carol Kay, plus an incredibly special Graham Nash deep dive, in which Graham himself rates and discusses everything he's ever released. That means solo, CSN, CSNY, CNN, and for good measure, Crosby's If I Could Only Remember My Name. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then. All right, let's talk about the next track. I Know There's an Answer, also known as Hang On to Your Ego. So this is not one of the tracks that was written by Brian Wilson and Tony Asher during their collaboration. This one was written by Brian Wilson, Terry Sachen, and Mike Love. The song was inspired initially by Brian's experience with LSD and his struggle with ego death. Musically, it's distinguished for its really colorful arrangement, unorthodox structure, and a bass harmonica solo by Tommy Morgan, who, Chuck, you interviewed, thankfully. The instrumentation also includes guitars, tambourines, tack piano, banjo, clarinets, flutes, electric keyboards, and timpani. Brian Wilson, Mike Love, and Al Jardine trade the lead vocal. The subject matter was unusual for rock music of that era. The era meaning 66, because by 67, 68, it really wasn't all that unusual anymore. Originally, it was titled Let Go of Your Ego, which is so interesting to me because let go and then hang on. You can see the struggle right there in the transition of the title change. And Mike Love refused to sing the first draft of lyrics because they promoted the use of LSD. In fact, one of the episodes, and I think I'm going to plan it as a Patreon episode for this episode, I took the sessions, the vocal sessions for Hang On to Your Ego / I Know There's an Answer, and I collapsed it down into a collage, Chuck, and it's amazing. It's a 23-minute episode that I collapsed 50 minutes of tape from, and it is basically Mike and Al's response to the music they were now being faced with, because this vocal recording session was the Beach Boys' introduction to Pet Sounds. They came back from the Far East from their tour. They had some R&R for a few days. They came into the studio and boom, this is what they were hit with. And so Brian just waded all the way into the deep end of the pool to start things. He went right to the most difficult track, which is an interesting way to kick things off. So after Mike voiced his objections, Brian allowed him to revise the song's message to be about finding meaning within yourself and allowing others to live as they wish, despite he himself having reservations against those who abuse LSD as a form of escapism. And I have to say, as a side note here, anyone who's attempting to either use or abuse LSD as a form of escapism, good luck, because that's the last thing that LSD provides. You're going to be faced front and center with anything that you're dealing with on LSD. That is not a drug you want to use for escapism purposes. Mike Love was not granted an official writing credit for his contributions to I Know There's an Answer and Hang On to Your Ego until 1994. An earlier mix of the song featuring the group singing the Hang On to Your Ego lyric revision was released as a bonus track on the 1990 CD reissue that preceded the twofers. But interestingly, the lyrics are not all that different between Hang On to Your Ego and I Know There's an Answer. Most of the lyrics are actually almost exactly the same. Chuck, let's talk about the background of the tune.
As you mentioned a minute ago, this was conceived as Let Go of Your Ego. and it was originally written by Brian and Terry Sachen. Sachen had been hired as the band's road manager in early 1965. Wilson was inspired to write the song following his experience with LSD. Lauren Schwartz, a talent agent who actually introduced Brian to LSD and was with him when he took his first LSD trip, recalled that Brian had achieved full-on ego death through the drug. Explaining Sachen's background, Schwartz wrote that Sachen had met Wilson through Wilson's younger cousins. Quote, Terry ingratiated himself with Brian by supplying him with marijuana, hashish, and tempting him with other substances. His 2016 memoir, I Am Brian Wilson, stated of this song, quote, people took acid to get away from themselves, but that wasn't the right way to take it. It was supposed to make you go deeper into yourself. I wanted to remind people that they could survive everything best if they remembered who they were. End quote.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the controversy and the rewrite that occurred. Mike Love stated in a 1993 interview that he found the original lyrics, quote, so totally offensive and nauseating that he refused to sing them. Quote, hang on to your ego was too much of a doper song to me. My mindset at the time, not having done LSD, heroin, or cocaine, was that we shouldn't be promoting that stuff. So in a sense, I was being the straight guy in the group, the square. The people that I'd seen indulge in those things exhibited behaviors and mannerisms that left much to be desired, and hang on to your ego was a lyrical byproduct of that drug subculture. I thought a positive message that wasn't related to the drug culture would be preferable on Pet Sounds. So I came up with the alternate lyric, which reflected finding yourself. I always tried to put a positive spin on things. In his recollection, he was aware of the fact that Brian had experimented with LSD and knew that the, quote, prevailing drug jargon suggested that doses of LSD would shatter your ego, as if that were a positive thing. I wasn't interested in taking acid or getting rid of my ego. By the way, the latter of which is completely and utterly clear and has been made clear for the remaining several decades now. Al Jardine recalled that, quote, Brian was very concerned and asked the rest of the band for their opinions. Quote, to be honest, I don't think we even knew what an ego was. Finally, Brian decided, forget it, I'm changing the lyrics. There's too much controversy. Mike Love said that Brian didn't balk at his proposed lyric changes. Quote, maybe he cared, maybe he didn't. He never said anything to me directly. In a 2007 interview, Brian said he didn't mind changing the lyrics. He said, quote, but you know what? The ego of the band was Mike. He was the ego guy, of course. It's kind of like Mike refusing to sing Guess I'm Dumb because, he felt either too close to the lyrics or insulted by them. That's how it ended up a Glenn Campbell song. In retrospect, Al Jardine said of the dispute, quote, it's funny. Now it seems like no big deal. It just seemed like it at the time. Conversely, Bruce Johnston felt that it was, quote, not one of my favorite songs. I remember recording it as Hang On to Your Ego, and it just never, ever felt right to me either way. I was more interested in the harmonicas and the double bass. Let's talk about the lyrics of the song, Chuck.
Well, as we know, the song was renamed and became Hang On to Your Ego. At this juncture, the lyrics referenced acid-induced ego death and advised users of LSD to be wary of the drug's effect on the mind. I just thought that to say hang on to your ego was an ego statement in and of itself, which I wasn't going for, so I changed it. I gave it a lot of thought. After being renamed again, now becoming I Know There's an Answer, most of the other lyrics stayed the same. And despite concerns over the song's drug references, the key line, they trip through the day and waste all their thoughts at night, was retained.
That is just so odd to me. I mean, basically, almost none of the lyrics were changed. I actually like the I Know There's an Answer chorus better than Hang On to Your Ego. It feels like a more well-rounded song, and it does feel less like a niche subculture song and more like something that anyone could connect to. But ultimately, 90% of the lyrics stayed the same?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. I guess it was just that little sticking point. I do think the change was obviously for the better. I know that There's an Answer is a great declarative statement. It basically affirms that, hey, shit may be going on in your life, but you'll find a way through it.
It fits on Pet Sounds, whereas Hang On to Your Ego, it's a great song. It doesn't as much fit on Pet Sounds.
I agree. 100%. Mike Love said that his revisions were an attempt to reflect the more positive message of finding yourself. Brian supported that message. Asked in an interview about what the answer in the song was, he responded, yourself.
Let's talk about the recording of the song. Brian produced the backing track for I Know There's an Answer, which was then slated and logged as Let Go of Your Ego initially on February 9th, 1966 at Western. With the exception of an overdubbed banjo played by Glenn Campbell, the track was recorded live with an orchestra of 15 musicians. Before one of the takes, Brian jokingly referred to the song as Let Go of Your Libido. Great advice.
That's so great.
Vocal overdubs followed a week later, by which time the song had been renamed. As the sessions began, Mike Love struggled to sing the song and repeatedly mocked the lyrics, at one point singing the opening lines in the style of Jimmy Durante and James Cagney. Al Jardine similarly encountered issues singing the vocals to Wilson's satisfaction and remarked, "Hey Brian, this is a little tricky. I can't hack this without your help. I mean it. I'm mentally destroyed." Now, just to illustrate the division here, Al was not trying to throw the session. Al was just having a hard time hitting it. Mike was trying to throw the session. Mike continued to joke around and distract Al. Brian lost his patience and shouted through the studio intercom, "Hey, you guys, don't fuck around. Please, we've got to do it. Mike, come on, guys, let's cut this fucking thing." After Jardine's 14th take, Brian announced that he'd been satisfied with the performance, although Al felt that Wilson may have been just accepting it. Jardine's vocal takes ultimately ran up to 18. What I just described is going to be an episode. It'll just be a day in the life of them doing this session, and you'll get a sense without any kind of pundits talking about Mike Love is this, Mike Love is that. You can hear Mike Love at play. Mike didn't like this, and he did everything in his power to throw the session. It tells a very clear story. On that day, February 16th, Brian completed the mono mix of the song, and the group later re-recorded the vocals to accommodate the song's reconfiguration, as I Know There's an Answer. Except for the chorus, the final vocals were recorded on or around March 3rd at Western. Further overdubs to the track, including the chorus vocals, were likely tracked on April 17th at Western.
Although you might not expect it, cover versions of I Know There's an Answer have been recorded by artists such as Sonic Youth and the Pixies' Frank Black, the latter using the Hang On to Your Ego lyric. The first one was in 1990 when Sonic Youth contributed to the album Smiles, Vibes, and Harmony, a tribute to Brian Wilson.
In 1997, the Levelers recorded it as a B-side to their song What a Beautiful Day.
In 2002, Aaron Sprinkle included it on Making God Smile.
In 2005, the Vitamin String Quartet put it on their record VSQ Performs the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds.
And in 2013, The Ashes, Mint 400 Records presents the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, included this song.
In 2016, Christian Bland and the Revelators put it on a tribute to Pet Sounds. Now, it sounds like the last several albums were all, a full recording and tribute to Pet Sounds. So, ultimately, not a ton of cover versions of this, but certainly the Sonic Youth one is the one that everyone should be seeking out. It's a great rendition. But it is worth noting the Frank Black version, which is on his first solo album, Frank Black, which I believe I bought the day it came out, was one of the first tracks recorded for the LP, which originally had been planned as a covers album. I always thought that it was super cool that he did the Hang On to Your Ego rendition, and not the I Know There's an Answer. Joey Santiago from the Pixies guested on lead guitar, and the music video for the song actually featured cameo appearances from Tony Asher and, less relevantly, Charles' younger brother, Parker Thompson. I love this. Brian Wilson's 2016 memoir briefly references the cover version by Frank Black, stating only that, quote, "Someone played me a song once by Frank Black," end quote.
Incredible.
You gotta love these quotes. Just as a side note to Frank Black, I just got back from LA where I spent a number of occasions with Stevie Kalinich. And believe it or not, Stevie Kalinich just wrote songs with Frank Black.
Wow. That's really cool.
So let's, Chuck, you and I talk about how we connect with this song, seeing as we believe that this is something of an emotional concept album. And this time, I'll try not to shed any tears.
Well, this for me, Dave, I really tend to be of the Bruce Johnson mindset. I mean, to me, it's a great instrumental. The vocal sounds great. It's not really something that has swayed me, moved me, influenced me, had anything meaningful to do with my life. So I have to really say it's just a part of Pet Sounds, and it's fine. I get it. I understand what it was aiming to do, I guess. But at the same time, it's not something that I would say, hey, this is one of my top 3 favorite songs or an important song in my life personally.
It's not surprising, given that you're a retired police officer and I'm somebody who has experimented with psychedelics, that I consider it a key track on the record. To me, the asking of questions started early on. I remember, as a little kid, trying to picture what it would be like if there was absolutely nothing, not just shutting my eyes and conceiving of blackness, because blackness is something. I'm talking about the absence of anything, and trying to get myself into a mind frame where I could actually exist in nothingness. And later I tried to get there using meditation. But for me, there are no answers. There's no satisfactory answers that I've ever wrapped my head around, or as Philip K. Dick once said, how to build a universe that falls apart 3 days later. There are only questions, and it's the asking of those questions and the constant asking of them that both drive me completely batshit crazy at all times and still yet keep me rooted in the searching for more out of my life, other than just task-driven reality and getting stuff done during the day, but to search for something. Also, in a more specific, more subcultural sense, the hang on to your ego part of this song, the process of taking acid or mushrooms or any psychedelic and either trying to hold on or let go and let it wash over you, you are always faced with that choice. And if you have taken it, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, you have no idea what I'm talking about at all. But you can either fight it and try to almost surf on it. In other words, like you are sublimating this incredibly powerful drug and trying to just watch the walls breathe and be amused, while your mind and your soul are really attempting to take you on a ride, which is where you're letting go of your ego. And it really is often a decision that you have to face early on in the psychedelic experience, whether or not you're going to be, as the Beatles said, turn on your mind, relax, and float downstream. That's exactly what they're talking about. That is hang on to your ego. They're talking about the exact same thing, and that's actually from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which Timothy Leary adapted for the Psychedelic Experience book.
This is really interesting, and of course I say this as someone who has never done anything except drink alcohol. Is it fear? Is it fear that dictates which decision you make? Is there a fear of letting go and never coming back, of having that stereotypical trip where you have constant flashbacks and stuff? Is that what prevents you from letting go?
It is fear. It's not the flashbacks, though. It's more of a fear of the process of taking LSD. I'm going to stick with mainly LSD, even though we could be talking about mushrooms. DMT is another one. If the universe had a pair of eyes, you're looking right into them. And it's a tough thing to not avert your gaze, because that's maybe not what you were expecting if you've never taken a psychedelic before. And it's a tumultuous process. It's not that you think that there's going to be damage later, as much as if you let this process have its way with you, how will you be emerging on the other end? It will change you as a person. Just taking it once, you'll be changed forever, and in a positive way. But if you're not somebody who typically has profound thoughts, or you're not someone who's typically seeking the profound, then you would be somebody who would be trying to fight it.
Do you actually have that level of control once you've taken that substance, that
Not
drug?
Not necessarily. It depends on the amount that you've taken. It depends on how adept you are at really surfing it. I mean, the metaphor is extremely apt because the waves that you feel with acid, it'll come on really strong and then subside. And it'll keep doing this throughout the entire experience. And you have to know how to ride those waters. Or you can, for example, lose your shit in public. You'll be acting in a way that truly is not societally accepted. You know, breaking down in absolute hysterics at nothing whatsoever is not cool in front of a lot of people.
Right.
And, you know, if you're by yourself, that's one thing. The ways that you act on acid make sense to you while you're on acid. They do not make sense typically to somebody who's not on it.
So because you're one who has dabbled in it and with it, do you feel, and remember at the time, LSD was new. They didn't know about dosing. They really didn't know about the effects, long-term, even short-term, etc. Do you feel that this was the turning point for Brian, and that the LSD experience he had when he first started, when it was a brand new substance out there, damaged his brain and affected him for the rest of his life?
I think it had a part in that. I just got done completing a series on Moby Grape, and the LSD triggered a latent schizophrenia in Skip Spence.
Right.
It wasn't the acid that damaged him. It was personality components that when activated, it was not a good combination. That's why, you know, it's not for everybody, because if you have any latent psychosis in your family, you might not be the kind of person who should be dabbling with it. And for Brian, there was that added component of being a very sensitive personality type who felt things very deeply and who was in the public eye as well. So he's taking trips and coming back into our atmosphere. There's a process of reacclimation that is like the inner space version of an astronaut re-entering our atmosphere and our society. And he didn't have the luxury of taking a couple days off to let the events of the trip sink in and be able to put the pieces of his personality back together, which one kind of needs to do. You don't lose who you are, but you have to be able to have the capacity to put into play what you've learned. You have to come down.
There's a self-evaluation part of this.
You have to come down off the mountaintop and set foot on planet Earth, or else these revelations are nothing but crackerjack revelations that will only make sense to the acid-addled mind.
Very interesting.
So I think for Brian, it was ultimately great for creativity, unbelievable. I don't think Smile would be what it was without acid. But also it put a lot of things into play that included auditory hallucinations and included voices. And I don't know, it's a chicken or the egg thing. I don't know if those preceded the acid experience, but there's a lot of insight in your interview with Bill Wagner, the Four Freshmen's manager, where he gives definitely some insight into how that may have affected him.
And I did speak to several mental health professionals when I was writing my book, and they affirmed exactly what you just said, that, you know, if there is underlying psychosis, and again, let's remember that this is 1966, this is a brand new drug, and we don't know what the strength was, the dosage was, etc. It could absolutely be the catalyst for bringing these mental flaws to the forefront and exacerbating.
Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show-per-week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. This episode is brought to you in part by Bespoke LA. Located in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, Bespoke LA is the modern podcaster's dream come true. It's got 2 podcast pods available, one with audio only and the other with both audio and video. Just think, you can start your own podcast tomorrow without investing a single penny in equipment. What, you don't have experience editing? Don't even sweat it. For an additional fee, Bespoke LA can edit your podcast. Or not, it's entirely up to you. Rates start at $75 an hour with discounts if you book 4 sessions at once. Go to bespokela.com/podcast. That's BSPOKELA.com/podcast for more information or to book your time today. And be sure to tell them that Dave sent you for a one-time 25% discount. So moving on from that one, track 3 on side 2 is Here Today. Here Today was written by Brian and Tony Asher, and the lyric is really a warning to the listener of inevitable heartbreak before the narrator reveals himself to be the ex-boyfriend of the listener's newfound love. A pay it forward as part of the bro code, so to speak. So this was one of the last songs that was recorded for Pet Sounds. Brian produced the track in March 1966 with the aid of his bandmates who provided additional backing vocals and 12 studio musicians who played guitars, organ, upright bass, trombones, saxophones, tack piano, drums, and other percussion. Mike Love sang lead vocal. Here Today proved influential to musicians like Al Kooper, Paul McCartney, and Lemmy. Blood, Sweat, and Tears founder Al Kooper, whose favorite album of all time is the 1997 box set The Pet Sounds Sessions, said that Here Today inspired the organ break in his band's 1969 hit You've Made Me So Very Happy, as well as his songs I Can Love a Woman from 1968 and Lucille from 1969. Lemmy from Motorhead regarded Here Today as quite innovative and would perform the song at clubs early in his career. Musician Lenny Colacino argued that the bass part was a direct influence on Paul McCartney's bass playing on With a Little Help from My Friends and Getting Better from Sgt. Pepper. Let's talk about the background and the lyrics to the song, Chuck.
Now, I don't know if this would be considered controversial, but Tony Asher is only credited with providing lyrics to Brian's music, but Asher credited himself with contributing musical ideas to several songs on Pet Sounds, including Here Today. As Asher stated, quote, Here Today contains a little more of me, both lyrically and melodically, than Brian. Moreover, Asher said, that's a song that has a number of little sections to it that are quite different. It was not one of the easier songs to write on the album. It was, as I recall, a song that I wrote quite a lot to, much of which we didn't use. It was sort of a struggle before we got a lyric that Brian was happy with, end quote. Brian stated in 1996 that Here Today had really good lyrics, but in another interview from the same year, he said, Here Today was probably one of the mystery songs on the album. I don't really know what it's about. I liked it, but yet I didn't. I don't really identify with that song like I do with You Still Believe in Me or Caroline No. It was just one of those songs in there. One little song.
The song also had an odd construction that, as you had alluded to before, Chuck, made it difficult to write. Tony said, quote, I wrote more lyrics to Here Today than we used. The song has several sections that vary in tempo, and Brian and I struggled to find a lyric that we were both happy with. While it is rare for a chorus to contain an odd number of measures, all three choruses on Here Today are 7 bars. Most choruses are 8 bars long. Occasionally, a chorus will be lengthened to imply suspense or extension of time. The purposeful shortening of the choruses here emphasizes the Here Today, Gone Tomorrow idea that's reflected in the lyric, again making it another stroke of genius for the Pet Sounds record.
Notwithstanding what we quoted Brian as saying before, he has also said, Here Today was a work of art. It was an assertive track with utilization of basses played up higher. The trombones gave it that masculine touch. He stated that his intention for the piece was to conceive the idea of a bass guitar playing an octave higher than it normally would, thus showcasing it as the principal instrument on the track. The arrangement includes a horn ensemble consisting of 2 saxes and 2 trombones. I personally believe, Dave, that the sax voicings were influenced by Four Seasons songs such as Opus 17, Don't You Worry About Me. I also noted in my book that throughout this song, the bass line accentuates the melody. The bass and horns also move in contrary motion to the vocals. The contrasting motions, which often conflict with Mike Love's vocals, create a slightly uneasy feeling, not unlike how one would feel in a volatile romance.
As far as the recording of the song goes, interestingly, Here Today was the last song started for the Pet Sounds album. It was logged as I Don't Have a Title Yet. The instrumental track was
great.
Yeah, the instrumental track was recorded on March 10th or 11th, 1966 at Sunset Sound Recorders Studio A. This marked the only occasion that Wilson recorded at Sunset Sound during the Pet Sound sessions, having been recommended the studio by session musician Steve Douglas. The engineer for this session, Bruce Botnick, later worked on the 1967 album by Love, Forever Changes, another masterpiece. The vocals were overdubbed 2 weeks later on March 23rd and 25th at Columbia Studio A. In the original mono release, some legendary studio chatter spoken by Bruce Johnston about a photographer's camera can be heard during the instrumental break. Then you can hear Brian shouting, "No talking," at Johnston, who had been unaware that the tape was rolling. Bruce recalled this exchange as an example of how, quote, Brian was a combination of Rachmaninoff and General Patton. He was brilliantly brutal in the studio. At the end of this break, Brian says, "Top, please," which was an instruction to the engineer to rewind the tape to the beginning of the song so the group could attempt another take of the vocals. Let's talk about the release history.
In December 1967, Here Today was issued as the B-side to the 1967 single Darlin', a top 30 hit. Unlike earlier B-sides by the Beach Boys, such as Don't Worry Baby and God Only Knows, it did not chart. Also, in 1996, to promote the Pet Sounds session box set, Sub Pop issued a newly mixed stereo backing track of Here Today as the B-side of the first true stereo mix of I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. That was done by the great engineer Mark Lynette. This version omitted the studio chatter present in the 1966 mono mix, which is completely insane.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I personally have no use for a version of Here Today without the accidental chatter or purposeful chatter that's retained in the Brian Wilson sanctioned version. To me, that's part of the song. I've come to expect it, and I always look forward to it.
Well, that is part of the, what I call sloppiness of that mono mix. And I don't believe that Brian intended to leave it in. I think what ended up happening is he was in a rush and he was kind of limited because they bounced a lot of these tracks down from 2 and 3 track stems or channels down to a mono track. And then they went back and re-recorded on those other tracks. And I think at some point it probably just crept in to one of the mono mixes and he really couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah, I just, I've become used to it. And plus, there's so much idle chatter in previous Beach Boy releases that it doesn't seem like an outlier to me, and it doesn't feel like a mistake.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's talk about the many cover versions. I'm guessing there's probably more than this, but in 1966, the Rob Storm Group did a version of this.
1966, Bobby V.
In 1967, both the Pleasers and the Seftons did versions of it.
1970, it was covered by Sunshine.
In 1981, R. Stevie Moore did a cover of it.
And in 82, Matilda Santing did it on her self-titled album.
In 1998, Thurston Moore covered it for the Smiling Pets compilation.
In 2002, Brian himself reprised it on Pet Sounds Live.
In 2012, Jody Marie covered it for the Mojo Cover Mount CD, Mojo Presents Pet Sounds Revisited.
And in 2013, the 1 and 9s covered it on the Mint 400 Presents the Beach Boys Pet Sounds.
And then in 2016, Cool Ghouls covered it for a tribute to Pet Sounds, which I'm guessing has all the rest of this as well. Let's now talk about how you and I, Chuck, connect with this song. What's the keyhole through which you connect with this song?
I just love this as an instrumental, honestly. I mean, I think it's one of the integral songs on the album, but, for me, it's just got a great instrumental. That's really it.
For me, even though I like the song, I do agree with that one assessment. The day that Brian Wilson did not like this song, whatever day that was, I believe, to me, this is, sort of a drawing the arrow back before it's set loose, because the rest of the album is so powerful that to me, this is kind of where we're shoring up that energy to be able to experience the rest of it. But lyrically, before my marriage, I had 7 billion micro relationships. I never really had a relationship that lasted more than 4 years, but I had a number of them that lasted for about 6 weeks, like 7 billion 6-week relationships where I'd swoop in for a 6-week descent. And once I realized that I didn't want to get married, like it wasn't an end in itself, I would wind up skedaddling because I didn't want to waste my time or the other person's time. So I think it left people maybe a little quizzical. Why did he come on so strong? The reason is I felt what I felt, and then I realized it wasn't going to be forever, but there's no excuse for sloppy emotional behavior. That's just how I acted when I was younger. But the one that really reflects this song is the short union that had its way with me. Because usually I was the one doing the heartbreaking, which I'm not boasting about. That's just how it wound up happening. But there was a girl in my life who I had a 9-month relationship with. And for the first 4 months, it was perfect. At least it felt perfect. In retrospect, I can see red flags dotting the landscape like crazy, but not at the time. Because, man, did I have the wool over me like crazy. And, I never had the ability to warn anyone about her, but her first name was Simona. So there aren't a lot of people out there with the name Simona. And so if you meet someone named Simona, just take a pause for a second and just look for red flags, because if it's coming from her, there is a chance that you met who I met. And if that's the case, then read the lyrics to Here Today and you've been warned.
That's great.
It's the bro code. We got to do it for each other. All right, that about does it. Stay tuned, because next week brings upon us my interview with ex-Pixies bassist Pazlin Chanton about her incredible new solo record. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then come Monday, the major tier gets a very special treat. I've assembled a legitimately spellbinding Hang On to Your Ego Beach Boys session collage, which is truly must-hear listening on a whole other level. The Beach Boys returned home from their triumphant tour of the Far East in early 1966. Upon walking into Western Recorders Studio 3 on February 9th, 1966, it was without the knowledge that they were a whole different band now. Pet Sounds vocal session number 1 was for the track Hang On to Your Ego, which just goes to show that Brian wasn't at all interested in pussyfooting around the changes he had in mind for the group. What's fascinating about the fly-on-the-wall eavesdropping is the varied responses of the boys. A frustrated Al Jardine gives it his all while being dragged through take after take. And honestly, since hearing this recording, I have never looked at him the same way again. And then there's Mike Love. Cousin Mike, quite obviously not liking what he's hearing, sabotages this session in every way imaginable, from singing the song like Jimmy Durante to making fart noises, and even worse. Much worse, as you'll hear. Everyone's got their take on Mike Love, and notwithstanding whether yours is hero or villain, it's undeniable that Mike couldn't possibly be less interested in Brian's ego music. There will be a very short sneak peek running publicly for free on Monday morning, but the entirety of this show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. Don't miss it, or you'll only be getting part of the story. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of my Paslin Chanton interview. It's the episode as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then come Friday, everyone else gets to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Chuck Granata, Richard Holland, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, Joe Kennedy for that killer new theme song, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator, and much, much more. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the classic rock and roll from the 1960s is to go to the Beach Boys Season 1, Catch a Wave, 1961 to 1964, from episode 189 on, the Righteous Brothers Bill Medley interview, that's 181 and 182, my interview with the Free Design, that's 160 to 162, my epic interview with the Mamas and Papas Michelle Phillips, that's 141 to 159, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, that's 137, my 12-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander from the Association, that's 109 to 113, Vashti Bunyan reading her entire output, that's 103 to 104, Sergio Diaz from Os Mutantes, that's 86 and 87, Bert Summer, that's 83 and 84, Sweetwater is episode 79, a tribute to David Crosby, 77 and 78, Andrew Tuttle rates the Monks, 74, Jim Florentine on Black Sabbath is 64 to 68, Lou Barlow on the Zombies is 59 and 60, Marvin Gaye biographer David Ritz rates Marvin Gaye, that's 45 to 47. Blind Faith is 43. Anthony Fantano rates the Velvet Underground, it's 32 and 33. Bob Forrest rates the band is 25 and 27. Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rates the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. Don Randy rates David Axelrod as 17. Badfinger is 16. The Bee Gees is 10 and 11. Sly and the Family Stone is 5, 6, and 7. And Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, October 10th, we're coming at you with my interview with ex-Pixies bassist Paz Lanchanton. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!